Telesphorus Lautsavicius had no right to be born, but he was born. He had no right to live, but he lives. His parents, a Jewess Ruta and a Lithuanian man Pranas, were brave enough to love each other and to have a baby in the years of war. At that time, Jewish women were forbidden to give birth. Pranas's love for Ruta was so strong that he tore away her yellow star and married her. Pranas and Ruta were shot dead on the bank of the Vicha River in October 1944. Telesphorus was nearly 2 years old by then, and he was saved in Tel Shay, the town of love of his parents. Around the pole, by the firs, there is a rivulet with a stone bridge across it. There lies my native town, Tel Shay. Houses, children playing with slingshots, surround the town market and butchers' shops. Proud-looking Jews are going to the synagogue. The great synagogue, the tailor's chapel, and the market are always full of Jewish people. Yeshiva students from every house are going for a walk from the church to the green hill. The old deep well, its waters is as clear as a mirror. I look at it as if at a mirror. Where has it gone now? O wind, embrace my prayer, that I let go with tears of longing. My heart dissolves in the town that no longer exists. Svi Brik. The Jews of Tel Shay called this town in their own manner, Telts. There are mainly Jewish shops at the center of the town. Tel Shay was famous for its piety. Tel Shay Yeshiva, the school of rabbis, was one of the most famous schools of this kind in Europe. Chaim Kaplansky owned the most fashionable photo shop in Tel Shay. Jews and Lithuanians wish to have their pictures done here. On the day of their wedding, Onet Lautsaviceni and her husband visited this shop. They lived happily, had 2 children. Pranas was born first. 2.5 years later, they had a daughter, Jadviga. My father died very early and my mother was left alone with 2 children. They had 2 houses back then, and after father's death, my mother had to manage everything alone. My mother was an educated woman and lived for some time in different towns. In Vilnius, that is why she managed to do everything successfully. Onet Lautsaviceni pampered her children. She used to buy clothes at the most beautiful shop that was owned by the Gurvici and Volpert families. This is a picture done by the same Chaim Kaplansky. The head of the family, Alida Volpert, was born in 1870 in Riga. She graduated from the prestigious gymnasium in Jelgava and married a man named Volpert from Tel Shay. In 1907 they lost everything they had in the Great Fire of Tel Shay, but managed to recover very soon. Alida Volpert spoke German, French, Russian and Lithuanian fluently. President Antanas Smetona also graduated from the same gymnasium in Jelgava. When he used to meet her in Palanga, a famous summer resort, he usually greeted Alida sincerely and kissed her hand. Alida lived in the same house with her son Gershionas Volpertus, with his wife and daughters, and her daughter Rakeli Gervicieni, with her husband Jaime and children Ruta and Jakovas. Jakovas Gervicius is 79. He lives in Haifa, Israel. The memories of Tel Shei still live in his heart. He remembers Tel Shei as a friendly town, a beautiful family, and happy childhood that was ended by war. Jakovas and Ruta studied at the Lithuanian gymnasium before the war. There were few Jewish students at the gymnasium, less than 1/10. Jakovas was fond of his school. He even went to lessons that were not compulsory. Though the Jewish students could attend Judaism classes, Jakovas went to classes of the Catholic priest. Later the knowledge helped him a lot. When he was hiding, Jakovas served in a Catholic church at Mass. I knew all the teachers. They were all nice people. Jewish and Lithuanian students were all equal. The teachers were really intolerant to every manifestation of anti-Semitism. In fact, during the 5 years at the gymnasium, I had not the slightest chance to feel myself as a person of different nationality. Pranas Lautsevicius and his sister Jadwiga also studied at the same gymnasium, only in senior classes. Jadwiga today remembers Ruta Gerviciuti, dressed in her school uniform. She was a beautiful girl, and she was one of the best students of the Lithuanian language. As far as I remember, her knowledge of Lithuanian was really perfect. Ruta was 16 when a beautiful romantic friendship started between her and a few years older young man, Pranas. Every summer, the Gervicius family used to spend its holidays in Palanga. This picture of Ruta was taken on Palanga beach. She gave it to Pranas and wrote on the other side. Sometimes birds fly away and never return. Evening bells toll into the past. Youth, like those birds, will never come back. One day we will die. One day for sure. To my dear friend Pranas, Ruta. Tel Shei, October the 14th, 1937. I knew that my father used to be friends with many Jewish children who lived in Tel Shei, but friendship with Ruta was the most precious to him. But one day their paths separated. Ruta started her studies at Kaunas Vytautas the Great University. The girl chose chemistry. Pranas followed his sister to Klaipėda. Jadwiga Laucevičiūtė married Felixas Kuderka, a teacher, but she refused to be a housewife, which is why she went to Klaipėda to study the German language. My brother always took care of me. We were really very close. At first he studied in Kaunas, but after they opened something like union with some German company, my brother came to Klaipėda and began to work there, as he wanted to be by my side. In 1939, Jadwiga came back to her husband holding her teacher's diploma. In March of the same year, the Germans cut off the Klaipėda region from Lithuania. So Pranas decided to leave Klaipėda. He found a job in Vilnius. And Ruta enjoyed her life in Kaunas. The girl found many fields of interest: opera, concerts, cafes. She was also an excellent student and had many admirers. One of them had really serious intentions: Semakas Ginsbergas, a professional engineer who was engaged in the building of the State Lithuanian Bank. The man was interested in arts. He was a perfect pianist. The young man proposed to Ruta, and she said yes. After the wedding, the young couple settled down in Tel Shay. Ruta decided to postpone her studies for a year. But Europe was already clouded over by the Nazis. The Jews in Tel Shay learned about pogroms of the Crystal Night in Germany. They heard the hysterical shrieks of Hitler over the radio. The Gervice family asked their relatives in the USA for boat tickets, but couldn't close their business in such a short time, so stayed in Tel Shay. In 1940, Lithuania was occupied by the Soviets. They nationalized the shop and the house, owned by the Gervice and Volperte families. Ruta's uncle, Gershonus Volpertis, his wife and daughters were deported to Siberia. As it became clear later, this was for the better, because they all survived there. After the 14th came the 22nd of June. World War II stepped into Lithuania. The family nervously discussed what to do. They kind of decided to retreat to Russia, but father refused to go there. Mother did not want to go without him, and Ruta did not want to leave her mother, so all the family stayed in Tel Shay. On the 25th of June, German troops entered Tel Shay. In 3 days, all the Jews there were brought to the Rhine estate. By the way, before the war, that house belonged to the famous Lithuanian opera singer, Kypros Petrauskas. There were barns here. We lived here. There was a commandant's office in the house behind me. The commandant was Platekis. At first nobody thought that there possibly could be any killings. People just lived here. Some of them could go to Tel Shay for food. They even let us bring some personal belongings. There was a grand piano left in the house, so they ordered Semakas, Ruta's husband, to give a concert. Somebody learned about his talent. He was a great pianist. He studied at the conservatory. So those with white armlets ordered him to give a concert. I remember when he came to our barn and said very angrily, "Those creeps even applauded me." Soon the Jews heard about the first Jewish victim. Freibusch's Fadel Manus, without any reason, was beaten to death by his friend Patras Vaičiulis. Later on, Vaičiulis became a well-known killer. A few days later, death came to Rhine. First they picked 30 or 40 men and ordered them to stay in that square that is now in front of my eyes. Then they took them a few meters to the right. At that time we did not know what they had been chosen for. The men were ordered to dig pits. Actually, they were graves. To avoid panic, this group of men were not shot, but drowned in a nearby pond. Afterwards, the bodies were thrown into the grave. Soon other men were brought to those graves to be shot, and they saw bodies already lying there. At that time, Jakovas Gerviches survived by some miracle. We lived in the barn. Women and children slept downstairs. Men and teenage boys slept upstairs. That night I woke up about 3 o'clock. Like a baby, I felt a sudden urge to be with my mother. So I went downstairs and lay next to my mother, sister, granny and auntie. I sneaked out of danger without knowing it. I heard the men go outside, but I did not see my father and Ruta's husband anymore. All the men were taken to the pit. Soon the women heard the volleys of machine guns. The men were led towards the place where we are standing now. The drunken killers were already waiting there. They had been given a big shot of vodka each. The massacre started in the presence of the Tel Shay chief of police and some other officers. German officers were in command. 10 or 20 men were ordered to stand by the grave. Then they were shot dead. Then another 10 were brought, until everybody was killed. The massacre ended on Wednesday evening, the 16th of July. My father, Jaime Gervicius, my sister's husband, Semakas Ginsbergus, were killed here, as were 3,000 other Jews. Women screamed in the barns, mourning for their brothers, fathers, husbands.
Mama, aišku, verkė, Rūta verkė, babunė verkė, va aš buvau kaip su akmeniais.
Of course my mother cried, Ruta cried, Granny cried. But I was like frozen. Personally, I was shocked and frozen. I remember on Thursday morning my mother shortened my trousers and shaved the hair off my chest. She wanted me to look younger. On the same Thursday they collected the boys who were left alive and said, "Now you are the only men, so you have to take care of your women, cook food and see that everything is in order." On the 28th of July, the Jews from Rhine, Vieshvene, and from several other nearby places were brought to one estate called Geruli. There was a big estate house there. Women and children were placed in barns and piggeries. We half-starved there. In 2 weeks some people died of starvation. When you see lice crawling up an old man's back, it is really a shocking sight. Approximately 10,000 people were imprisoned at Geruli camp. Soon a rumour spread that they were going to establish a ghetto in Tel Shay, but there would only be 500 young women left alive. Yakovas and several other teenage boys ran away and spent a night at Farmer Dameka. Yakovas' granny, Alida Valpert, also escaped from the camp. 20-year-old Ruta and her mother Rakeli stayed in Geruli. The selection started on the morning of the 30th. The chief of police, Uodakis, the chief of security, Mikutskas, and other officers such as Serbalis, Alexandravicius came to the camp. Plus there were a group of drunken killers. They began picking people. There was one group at one side, another was formed on the other side. My mother looked very young at that time. She put on makeup and together with Ruta waited for her destiny. The local killers knew my mother and Ruta very well and respected them in their own way, so they led them in the group that was formed for women destined to live. At that time the killers started to kill another group of women and children.
Moteris su mažais vaikais, dar ta kolona, kur turėjo į telšius, dar stovėjo, buvo moteris ir vaikus jau pradėjo šaudyti.
Shots, shrieks of women and children were heard all day long. Officers brought peasants from nearby villages to backfill the giant grave because there were no Jewish men left. Yakovas hid in the village and worked at the farm.
Ir mama kaip nežinojo, kur mane surasti.
My mother did not know where I was, so she sent Rishkas, a very good man who helped the Jews a lot, to bring me back to her. When he came to me for the first time without any note from my mother, I refused to go with him. I was afraid. I said, "Bring me some proof that my mother and sister are still alive, then I will go." So he brought me a letter from my mother, where she wrote in German the things that he could not possibly know. Then I came back to the ghetto. His mother, grandmother and Ruta were glad to have a small but separate room in the ghetto. There were 500 people in that ghetto. The living conditions were better than we had in Garule. There were also some decent Lithuanian people around who helped us a lot. My family personally is very grateful to the President Adamkus's mother-in-law, Mrs. Nutotieni. She lived in Barutis Street, and I used to bring food from her, some meat, ham, and other products, so we could survive there. The living conditions were better than the ones we had in Rainai and Garule. At least we managed to get rid of lice. The fact that the Gervice family were imprisoned in the ghetto became known to the founder of the Museum of Lower Lithuanian Region, Alka, a poet, Pranas Genys. He came to the ghetto and offered Ruta a job. She gladly accepted the offer and worked here for about 4 months. She used to spend the whole day at the museum. Sometimes she even stayed for the night. By the way, Pranas Genys died tragically. In 1952, he was killed in Shilute, in the Soviet concentration camp. Back then, during the war, he gave jobs to 3 girls from the ghetto. This way, he eased their lives. Soon, Pranas Lautsevičius heard about the fact that Ruta was working at the museum.
Og brolis dirbo Vilniui jau.
At that time, my brother worked in Vilnius. Once he visited us in Telšiai, and I said to him that Ruta was working at the museum. Soon everyone in Telšiai heard the news that the local authorities decided to liquidate the ghetto and kill all the Jews. My brother was shocked at the news and went to Genys. Pranas Genys said that he had taken 3 girls from the ghetto, but let them go because he was ordered to do so. So my brother found Ruta at the ghetto and brought her to our mother's house. This is the house where Pranas brought the frightened girl. Owner Lautsevičienė gave a sincere hug to Ruta. Jadviga's husband, Kudirka, reacted differently. When my husband knew that Pranas was hiding a Jewess in our house, he said to me this would ruin his and my career. He said, "I will not tolerate this and I will leave Telšiai." I thought that these were only words, but he soon informed me that he was leaving for Raseiniai, so I was left alone, and my brother and Ruta stayed at our mother's. Yakovas also learned about the liquidation of the ghetto. After all the Jewish grown-up men were killed, 16-year-old boy became the head of the family. On the 23rd of December, Yakovas and his mother were in town when suddenly they heard the terrible news. The massacre had started. My mother and I were going to the ghetto to a medical examination, which meant that they were going to kill us. We ran from the car and went to the museum. Pranas Genys told us that Pranas Lautsevičius had taken Ruta to his house. This was a relief. We knew that Ruta was safe. Then they had to find a place to hide for themselves. Rakeli Gervecieni suddenly realized that they could turn to the bishop for help. So they found shelter with Bishop Staugaitis. Yakovas and his mother were hiding there for a week. Then they lived in another man's house. We have a long list of people who helped Yakovas and his mother survive the Holocaust. The priest Velutis, Mrs. Dausinieni, Nuniava, Buknis, the families of Vaichakauskas, Gerdvainis, Shimkas, Aidintis, Montvilla, Bira, Butvidis, Rupekaitis, Gwitsus, Tekorus. Yakovas Gervičius said that there were 3 villages near Telšiai, Kalneni, Buozheni, and Vigantishkas, and all the Lithuanians who lived in the villages helped the Jews. but Yakova's grandmother refused to hide. In February 1942, with the help of the Telsay diocese, she was brought to the ghetto in Cholet. While there, she took care of the ghetto children. She was shot dead in the autumn of 1943 during the so-called Children Action. Those who survived told that they saw her sitting in the back of the truck surrounded by children. She was comforting them. The slaughterous chopper was killing thousands of Jews in Lithuania, as everywhere else in Europe. At that time, Ruta and Pranas enjoyed the happiest days of their lives. They were madly in love with each other. Both of them almost forgot the cruel reality outside their door. My mother told them, "You should get married because you're living like husband and wife." You see how tolerant she was. Then they called for a priest and got married. So they got married.
Ir tada kunigą pavadino ir juos sujungė. Jie buvo žanoti.
They exchanged rings and swore to love each other forever. Pranas hoped that marriage with a Lithuanian man could save Ruta.
O jis lietuvis, tai tikriausiai ir Rūtą paliks.
Unfortunately, they realized that it was dangerous to stay in Telsay.
Tokie buvo Mikutos, du broliai.
There were the Mikuta brothers. They studied in Telsay. Our family knew them very well. When the situation became unbearable, one of the brothers invited Pranas and Ruta to stay at his house in Leizuve, so they left.
Kadangi mes mokėmės kartu, pakvietė ir jisai išvažiavo su Rūta ten į Laižuvą.
In November 1942, Ruta was going to give birth to their baby. Pranas wrote a letter to his mother asking for help.
Mama išvažiavo ten ir gimė štai.
Soon after my mother left for Leizuve, Telesphorus was born. But right after his birth, the problem started. Somebody informed the authorities something was going on. So what to do?
Ką daryti?
Feeling unsafe, Ruta wrote a letter to her mother. She knew where her mother was hiding. My dear beloved mummy, when you get this letter, I will be dead. I wrote you once that I met a man who loved me, and I loved him. He did everything for me. We lived for a year, and now we have a baby. A boy. But Mum, now I got caught and I think I will die. Do not cry very much. I was very happy with this man for the whole year, and my son will be alive. Mummy, I cannot write much. You understand what is going on in my heart. Remember me sometimes. I love you all very much, and kiss you, perhaps for the last time. Your daughter, Ruta.
Tai Rūta dar buvo po gimdymo.
Right after her son's birth, Ruta was still very weak, but Pranas somehow managed to bring her to Cholet.
Ir Pranas su ja išvažiavo į Šiaulius.
This is what Pranas wrote to Jadviga from Cholet. I hope you received my telegram, so you know that we are not in Leizuve anymore. I cannot write all the reasons in the letter. Mother will tell you everything. I just want to remind you to help Mother as much as you can. When there is a chance, I will take a few things of mine from Telsay. This is all for now. I wish all of you a happy celebration. Always yours, Pranas. Postscript. Jadviga, if our baby is safely brought to Telsay, please take care of him as your own child. Soon, Ona Laucheviceni came back with a grandson in her arms. Jadviga took care of Telesphorus as her own son.
Here
I spent all my childhood and youth. Here I lived right after my father sent me here in a carriage drawn by horses. We lived poorly, but two kind-hearted and loving women, my granny, Ona Laucevicheni, and my auntie Jadwiga, raised me.
Senosios Onos Laucevičienės ir mano tetos.
Sometime later, Ruta's mother, Rakeli Gervecieni, knocked at their door. Ona Laucevicheni kindly let her in.
Man pranešdavo, kad pas tave krata bus.
I was informed that they are going to perform a search in our house. Gervecieni stayed at our place. Our house stood next to a hill, and there grew some bushes on that hill. So she hid in those bushes. It was a good place. The woman was unseen, but she could observe everything: when, how, and who did the search. At night my mother used to crawl up to the bushes and bring her some food, because sometimes we had to wait for officers for a long time. Pranas knew a Mr. Lenkovicius who lived in Cholet. The man found Pranas and Ruta a job in the village. Ruta and her husband moved to a place next to where we are sitting right now. They lived at Moka's place. Pranas worked as a teacher and Ruta helped him there. She was like a manager in the school. The summer of 1944 was approaching. The joyful anticipation of victory was in the air. The Germans were unmercifully beaten on both fronts. Their troops were retreating from Lithuania. One day, Jadwiga's husband, Feliksas Kudirka, came back to the Laucevici house. He was planning to go to the States. I was here with little Telesphorus. He hurried in and said, "Let's go there." I said, "Let's go, but I have a baby now, so either you take us both or I stay here." My brother left the baby with me, so I have to keep my promise. My husband left for the States alone. Kudirka left alone, and Jadwiga held the baby in her arms, hoping that one day his real parents would come. This was the last day of Nazi occupation in Lithuania. The Germans were digging trenches in Kairiškis. Unfortunately, one of them, a local German man who studied with Ruta at university, recognized her. He informed the German officers.
Ir toj atvažiavo iš Šiaulių, iš kur nežinau, atvažiavo moment.
He informed the officers and they quickly came to Ruta and Pranas. From Cholet, I guess. They came very quickly and took them for interrogation, and then decided to shoot them dead. Pushing Ruta and Pranas to the bank of the Vervice River, the executioners told Pranas that if he shot Ruta, they would let him live. But Pranas only took his beloved in his arms and held her tightly. The fact that Ruta was pregnant with her second child did not stop the killers. After the retreat of the Nazis, Jadwiga Laucevičiūtė started looking for her dear relatives.
Ir ant kiekvieno žingsnio mane rusai visus stabdydavo ir dokumentus tikrino.
I remember Russian soldiers stopping me at every step and checking my documents. I hoped that I could still save my brother and Ruta, that they would be alive. But I only found a grave with some stones on it. I realized they were dead. I did not believe that my sister would be killed. I remember myself walking in Kvedana by the post office, and a postman called me Stasukas. During the war, that was my pseudonym. He said that he had a letter for me. I read that my sister and her husband were killed, and they left a 2-year-old son. Then I burst into tears. I cried for the first time. I did not cry after my father and all the relatives were killed. I cried then. After a year, the family decided to rebury the bodies in Tel Shay. Yakovas found a place for a grave, and Ruta and Pranas were brought to Tel Shay. Rakeli Gervetieni and Ona Lautsevetieni were now mourning. Both mothers' hearts broke with sorrow when they were burying their young, beautiful, loving children. Telesphorus Lautsevicius was 3 at that time and did not understand anything. He thought that his mother was Jadviga. He learned the truth later.
Dar kol buvo gyva močiutė, trupučiuką kalbėjau, paskui jau teta pilnai aiškino, kaip.
First my granny told me something, then later my auntie told me everything, told me about all the tragedy, all the problems that she overcame just to save me, to raise me, to educate me.
Įvairių bėdų ir užauginti, išleisti mokslus ir panašiai.
Ruta, Pranas and Jadviga, with the little Telesphorus on her lap, meet us in the Gallery of the Righteous in Vilnius State Gaon Jewish Museum, always young. Postscript. Yakovas Gervicius married his first love, Zoseli, in 1944. 17-year-old Yakovas had his first daughter. She was named after his deceased sister, Ruta. Yakovas and Zoseli had 3 daughters. They have lived in Israel since 1971. Jadviga Lautsevičiūtė married for the 2nd time and had a son and a daughter. She worked as a teacher all her life. She lives in Tel Shay. Telesphorus Lautsevicius studied at the same school as his parents. Jadviga and Yakovas waltzed happily at his graduation ball. When Telesphorus was going to marry, his hand gave him the ring, the wedding ring that Pranas had given to Ruta. Telesphorus gave the ring to his beloved Neoli and swore to love her forever. After their studies, they settled down in Panevėžys. Today, Ruta and Pranas would have been very happy to see their 3 grandchildren and 4 great-grandchildren. Love goes on.